Welcome back, everybody. You are listening to See Through Panel, a comic book discussion podcast. My name is Cole Harvey. I am here with Fahed Rahman.
Hello, everyone.
Today we're going to be doing our top books of 2021, so I will let Fahed take it away.
Sure. So these aren't in any particular order. So I'll start off with this one, which is
Oh, real quick, I
yeah,
should say, I believe this is just stuff we read in 2021, not stuff that came out in 2021,
yes. So
correct?
these are just books that we read in 2021, not books that came out in 2021. So starting with kind of quite a late entry for me, it's Bliss by Sean Lewis and Caitlin Yarsky. This is a book about basically a hitman who lives in a city which there's this drug called Bliss, which enables people to wipe away their memories, and it's it's a book that kind of examines forgiveness, family relationships, the nature of revenge. It's got some stunningly beautiful artwork, which supports a story which has real depth and heart, and is a really strong examination of kind of the nature of forgiveness, family ties, revenge, and the nature of belief as well. So it's a fantastic uh, graphic novel that I think a lot of people should kind of check out. It's got some beautiful artwork and fantastic dialogue.
I have not heard of that one. Who published that, if you
I
remember at all?
believe that's by Image, but don't hold
Okay.
me to that. I didn't. I haven't kind of written down the names of all the publishers.
I'm gonna do one that just got in here late too. Then I just finished reading the two hardcovers of The Hero by David Rubin, published by Dark Horse. Originally, I believe it was in Spanish in at one of his more local publishers, and they brought it to America with Dark Horse. It is an adaptation of the Hercules myth or the Heracles myth.
Yeah.
Um, it is, let's say, very graphic in its content and is
Okay.
definitely not a kid's book in any sense of the word, but it really stunned me, not only from, if you've ever seen David Rubin's art, he is, what should I say? He's like Paul Pope, and I'm not even. He looks a lot like Paul Pope, and but with a lot more bright color and a little bit of a looser line. And his art in this book is absolutely incredible, and it is. I won't go into too much detail trying to describe it, but you just look it up for yourself. He also is doing the writing, and he is kind of adapting the Hercules myths into, like, the 12 labors and everything, into kind of a sci-fi, a science fantasy type of thing, and it is just a really cool adaptation that I think really surprised me in pretty much everything that it did, and it pulled off all the themes. There's not a lot here that isn't already in the Hercules myth of
Yeah.
what it means to be a hero and the cost of that on your life and your family and all that. But I would highly recommend it to anyone who just likes to look at really brightly colored, beautiful art, or just is into like the Greek myth stuff.
Yeah, so another kind of late one for me is Beneath the Trees, Winter Chills by Dav or Dave. I'm not entirely sure how it's pronounced. I haven't done kind of a lot of research on kind of like the creators and stuff like that, but this is um, it's a really sweet story about Mr. Fox. He's got this enormous scarf that keeps him warm during the winter months, but also kind of gets him into a lot of trouble. So it's kind of like reading um, an animation, if that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
They do a lot of really clever work around um, panel play, and the timing of the comedy gags are done really well through that as well. It kind of reminded me of watching like one of those like Disney cartoons, or like a Warner Brothers cartoon, kind of just one of those short things about a character that gets into scrapes and stuff like that. But it's kind of quite a simple story, but the storytelling uh, methods they use with like the panel layout and there's very little dialogue throughout, so it's the art kind of carries the entire story. It's quite a short book as well, and yeah, so kind of would highly recommend if you've got your younger children. This is kind of like one for them. It's got beautiful uh, kind of Walt Disney style kind of artwork in there as well, and it's just for those who kind of like who are like connoisseurs or scholars of like comic book storytelling. They do some really quite sophisticated stuff with the panel layouts as well. So yeah, it's got it's one of those books that's got kind of like something for everyone.
Man, I haven't heard of either of the books you've mentioned so
Yeah.
far. This is gonna be a
So
long list.
beneath the trees, I think I saw Hassan El Tuhawi talk about on his Twitter threads. I think he did like a breakdown of the panel layouts on his YouTube channel. So that's how I got turned on to that one.
He has a really great YouTube channel.
Yeah, really
Um,
great one.
my next one, I'm gonna stick with the sci-fi for a second. I've finished the entirety of Black Science by Rick Remender and Matteo Scalera this year. It's published by Image. Obviously, I'm not sure if you've read it or heard of it, but it was a pretty big
I've
deal.
I've got to like Black Science is such like an epic like
Yeah.
story. So I think I've got to the bit where I think I've read like the first six trade paperback. I'm not entirely sure how many there are in there.
Maybe like 8 to 9. I've got them in three big hardcovers,
Yeah.
and yeah, there's a lot of stories. I would wager it's probably 8 or 9 trades. Yeah, it is definitely, yeah, it's a sprawling sci-fi epic. Once again, it is. I think it was like between 30 and 40 issues in the end, or something like that, and it is just the story of a man and his family adrift through kind of a multiverse type deal with Rick Remender doing super nihilistic punk rock writing, and which he always does, and Matteo Scalera doing some absolutely beautiful work. I hadn't seen him do comics before this. I believe he was a painter. He likes to do actual like non-sequential. He's a painter. But yeah, this was my introduction to his comics work, and it is man, it is breathtaking to see. And I'm not going to point out names, mostly because I don't know them, but also because I don't want to be rude. But they do switch colorists about
Okay.
halfway through, and the colorist on the last half of the book, it almost increases the level of the art by another notch entirely, just because of how well the coloring is done. There was no problem with the first guy. It's just the second guy when he comes in, it's you notice it. You notice that the quality just get a little bit higher, and that also kicked it up for me. So, Black Science.
Yeah, so my next one, again, these are in no particular order, is Monsters by Barry Windsor Smith. This, I think, is maybe one of the most anticipated graphic novels that was going to be released in 2021. It's, I don't know how many years was he kind of working on it. It's kind of like a ridiculous amount.
Like over
Um,
20, right? Or
yeah,
something
over
crazy
20
like that.
years that he was working on it. It kind of originally started off as a Incredible Hulk or Wolverine story. I can't remember um, which, and it's a very brutal, violent story that kind of covers themes around domestic violence, the nature of destiny, kind of post traumatic stress disorder, and um, kind of how governments can misuse their citizens for nefarious purposes as well. It's got some. It's a black and white comic book. It's got some absolutely gorgeous art. It just makes you realize what you can do with cross hatching and shading and stuff like that to really bring characters and images to life. Uh, Again, it does some really interesting things with lettering. Kind of the speech bubbles kind of like cut across different panels, so you kind of like zigzag across as you're reading it, and it's a very hard hitting book, and I think it was well kind of worth the hype. And anyone who doesn't have this book on their on their reading list should really seriously, you need to check it out. It's a monster of a book, and it's got a
Yeah,
monster reputation. I think it thoroughly deserves it as well.
man, I need to read that. It's just every time I start, I look at how dense it is, and I'm like, oh my
Yeah,
god, it's going to take me like a year to read
it
this.
it goes down quite smoothly though. I mean, it took me about a week uh, to read it, and it's one of those ones that I think will reward rereadings um, as well, because there's so much packed onto each page, so it's got kind of one of those ones where you'll be able to kind of pick out different details each time you pick it up.
I definitely need to get on that. Um, my next one is a bit weird because the actual creator of the thing I don't know anything about, but it's Jim Henson's Tale of Sand, adapted by Ramon Perez.
I think you mentioned this one before.
Have I?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think when we was doing one of our catch up ones. So yeah, yeah. Just yeah. Remind everyone about it.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not familiar with a lot of Jim Henson's work. I know he made the Muppets and he does the Dark Crystal, which everyone loves. And unfortunately, he passed away before he could finish the Tale of Sand, which I believe was going to be a movie.
Oh, I've read this. I've read this.
Yes,
It's very good. It's
yes,
very
one
good.
man
Yeah.
being chased through the desert.
Yes.
Um,
I've definitely
yeah.
read this. Yeah.
So it's published by
The
the Archaea imprint of Boom.
yeah.
And sorry, what?
Yeah. It kind of the ending's a bit of a head scratcher.
Yeah, the
Yes,
whole
but
thing's
yeah,
a bit of a head
yeah,
scratcher.
yeah.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't say there's a lot of story there, but Ramon Perez really he makes it shine. Honestly, at the end of it, I wondered if I would have cared about it as a movie, but as a comic, I love it just because of the art and the weird structure and very fluid storytelling that Ramon Perez uses. Um, I want to say storytelling, but there's not a lot of story. Um, yeah, it's basically just a mad dash of one man through a desert being chased by various and sundry people, creatures, everything. Um, it's mostly an art book for me and kind of just shows how dynamic Ramon Perez's style can be and how many different styles he has. Sadly, I don't think he's done anything at this level since this book. I've been trying to keep up, but I think he really shown best in this kind of indie adaptation side of things rather than with a big DC or Marvel gig. But yeah, it is one of the best things I read this year, regardless of it having almost no words in it and a very loose story. But yeah, Tale of Sand by Ramon Perez.
Yeah. So my next one is I'm kind of getting to books I've already. I think most of these I've already mentioned on the podcast in passing before. So my next one is Tales of the Mist by Laura Suarez. This is an anthology of supernatural folk tales set in northern Spain. I believe it's the Galicia region of Spain, and it's kind of very reminiscent of kind of Emily Carroll's work, kind of
Okay,
that kind of like that sort of horror story, um, kind of kind of the work that the comics that she tells around kind of like horror comics and supernatural comics, things of that nature, and it's just really fascinating to read about the folk tales and ghost tales of another culture that I wasn't really aware of. She does like fantastic artwork. She does really interesting, fascinating things around the way she uses tones. And yeah, I kind of it's kind of one of those ones where you're really eager to see kind of what they do next and kind of explore actually more into the the stories behind the stories, if that makes sense. Kind of, she's using this folk tale or this folk monster to as the big bad in this story. Oh, let me learn more about that monster. Let me go on Wikipedia and that sort of thing. So that's Tales of the Mist by Laura Suarez, and that's from Europe Comics, which I think is one of my favorite publishers at the moment.
that really does look like an Emily Carroll type of deal, like a fairy tale kind of like horror thing in the art style,
Yeah,
even just
and
the cover.
kind of the other thing it kind of also plays around with is like the period in which the anthology set, it's around that period of time where Spain was going through kind of like a fascist revolution as well. So that the
Okay.
civil war was always kind of in the background in a lot of these stories as well.
Very interesting. I'll have to check this one out. Okay. My next pick would be The Last God by Philip Kennedy Johnson and Riccardo Federici, which I definitely have. I know I've talked about this one on the show.
Yeah,
DC Black Label. Can't say much about this. It's just kind of my one of my favorite genres is fantasy and a big fantasy epic, and that's exactly what this is. It's just there's dwarves and elves and humans, and it's swords and shields and magic. And Riccardo Federici is a ridiculously good artist to tell this kind of story. It's hyper detailed. The action is jaw dropping. It's huge action set pieces. He does great facial expressions, making the intrigue well. And Philip Kennedy Johnson, he's kind of burst onto the scene and started writing a lot of stuff for DC, but this was the first thing I ever read from him, and still one of the few things I've actually read from him. And I love this story. I hope they follow it up. If they do follow it up, I hope they get Riccardo Federici because his art was really the selling point on this for me. And yeah, I wish we saw more like standard fantasy stuff in comics, and I get why we don't because it's not, you know, it's not like cerebral. It doesn't change the
yeah.
scene or the zeitgeist, but it's just my favorite stuff.
Okay, so I think I'm gonna bunch both of these comics together because I've talked about them on podcasts before. So the first one is "The Flowers of the Witch" by Enrico Orlandi. This is a really fantastic fantasy graphic novel. The artwork, it reminds me of the artwork from Song of the Sea, which is a film made by the studio called Cartoon Salon. Cartoon Saloon. Sorry, Cartoon Saloon. So the artwork reminds me very much of that. It's just a really well told uh, fantasy story about a young man that comes across a village in search of a flower that belongs to a witch, and kind of I'll leave it at that. And then the next one probably deserves a little bit more time, but I'm bunching these two together. Is Dajalia by Ginny Bar. This is
Yes.
as I think I've talked about this one before. So basically, it's as if Samurai Jack was set in Africa, and it's got exactly the same vibe as Samurai Jack. It's kind of that kind of sort of post-societal collapse. Like technology is kind of like gone crazy. We've got like Cybermen and mixed with magic, and in my written review of this on my blog, I said this graphic novels is the announcement of a major new talent in the comic book storytelling medium in Junni Bar. It's a fascinating exploration and remixing of African myths. It's got some fantastic art. It's got some of the most enthralling action sequences I read last year, and all that doesn't matter a jot unless you care about the characters. And he writes a really witty dialogue, and the characters are engaging, and the bad guys are hateable, but you kind of also kind of like them a little bit as well. So that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of another fantastic, sort of a really superb fantasy science fiction graphic novel there as well. I mean, I've talked about that one before, but if you've not read that one, it's any fantasy jam, that's definitely one you should be checking out.
I'm so glad you put that on your list because I looked at it over on my shelf the other day when I was putting my list together and thought
Yeah.
it'll be on for heads. I don't need to pick it.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
thank God.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that book. That's a thumbs up for me as well. My next one is at this point I should just say it's anything by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips because it seems to be the
Yeah.
only thing I'm reading.
I had like my entire list could have consisted of like Brubaker and Phillips comics. Their work on Reckless, and all the other things that they've released this year has just been like really good. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's just like one of those ones, really, isn't it?
It's insane what they're doing because I think I'm gonna own every book that they put out at some point now because yeah I read I think I talked on the catch up episode about Kill or Be Killed. And then I went after that episode. I went straight into reading Cruel Summer, and Cruel Summer is what's technically on my list, but it could be anything by them.
Yeah,
Um, it's a cast of characters with the perspective switching back and forth over probably would be like worth of 12 issues of comics. Um, Taking place over the course of summer, as it sounds, and it is just couldn't really tell you much without spoilers. It's
yeah.
just hard boiled crime and family intrigue and
I mean,
pretty revolting stuff,
yeah,
but it is
it's
perfectly executed.
just the stuff that they do so well. I mean, he's so prolific, and to be prolific and still produce the quality of the writing and the art that they do is something that really, I don't think a lot of people actually really appreciate how difficult it is. It's really amazing.
And they never really run out of ideas, it seems, because.
Yeah, I mean, you could criticize them. A lot of the stories are kind of similar, but how they
Mm-hmm,
generate the characters, and the little details to fill in those worlds, that's the trick. That's
exactly.
the trick, and that's so it's so hard. So yeah, that's a good shout. There. So my next one, how many have I got left? I've got a few left. So my next one is another book I think I mentioned on the podcast before, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. It's The Down River People by Adam Smith and Matthew Fox, and this felt like reading a HBO or Netflix TV series. It's about a young man who has just inherited his family's bar after his father passes away, and it kind of starts off as a meditation on kind of the nature of grief, but then goes into some really strange places. So I don't want to kind of like talk too much about kind of where it goes, but kind of talks about the nature of family relationships, the nature of memory, alcoholism, following in your family's footsteps, religion, and how that can provide solace, but also can be a trap. And yeah, it's beautifully written. Like the art itself is like really nice. It's got some stunning, especially towards the end. Some of the set pieces uh, uh, are gobsmacking and jaw dropping, but it's really the dialogue and the characters that kind of drive the story through. For me, kind of like it was kind of like one of those ones I had to kind of put down sometimes because a character you like was going to do make a really stupid decision. You could kind of like see it foreshadowed. So you just like, right, let me
mm-hmm.
just like let me walk away and let me calm down a little bit and then kind of get back into it. So it's a really fantastic book.
I need to check that out, man. I need to read all the stuff you read.
Yeah.
My list next year will just be your list for this year.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think it's my last one, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, my last one. I had to fit some horror on here,
Yeah.
and I actually am very upset that I don't own this book physically. I read it on my phone. It's The Silver Coin, published by Image. It's an anthology series where every issue is the whole thing's created by Michael Walsh. He draws every issue, but he brings on different writers for every issue as well. So he's got I don't have them all written here, but he's had people like Chip Zdarsky,
Oh
Jeff
wow.
Lemire, Kelly Thompson. Yeah, just big names in the American comics industries, and it's basically a horror anthology all centering around this silver coin that who you learn the origin of the coin, so I won't spoil that. But I was having problems finding really engaging, compelling horror stuff this year, and it's one of my favorite things to read in comics. But I kind of need the right blend of just very deliberate art. It needs to be just right for me for horror to
Yeah.
work, and then writing in comics writing horror in comics is just equally as difficult as
Yeah,
drawing it. So I had a difficult time. But the Silver Coin, being an anthology, makes it even more impressive. It knocked every single issue out of the park, and it's still going. So
yeah. So I think I've got a few more left on my list. So I've got Kingmaker, by who is it by? It's by Ian Eddington, Lee Gallagher, and it's a 2000 AD graphic novel, and it's just a really well written sci-fi fantasy uh, graphic novel. It's about uh, basically this uh, goblin, and he's basically, it, how to describe it? It's kind of like a hybrid between like high sci-fi and fantasy, and mixing those two things um, uh, together, and it's like Lord of the Rings um, meets Halo, if that makes sense. So it's yeah,
that's
yeah, it's like one of those ones, and the titular Kingmaker is this goblin who has to unite the warring kingdoms between the dwarves, the elves, and kind of all these different like fantasy creature tribes that you kind of get there, and it's up to him to kind of unite these tribes against this growing extraterrestrial threat. So it's really good. I don't think it's been concluded yet, but yeah, it's an ongoing series, and definitely one to check out.
that sounds right up my alley.
My next one is let me have a look on my list. Um, so I'll bunch these two together. So Quarantine Comics, it's by Rachel Smith, and it's just um, she wrote a strip every day during the 2020 lockdown and shared it online, and it's just that collection of comic strips collected into an anthology. It's kind of observations about witty observations about how terrible lockdown was for her mental health, her relationships, and stuff like that. But it's also kind of like delightful because it kind of realizes that makes you realize that these are shared experiences that a lot of people kind of went through, and she's got a real dab hand at making humorous observations about kind of the weird things that people do or got up to in lockdown. And then my next one is Save It for Later by Nate Powell. So Nate Powell is one of the co-creators of March, which was
Yes.
the uh, biographical comic of Senator. I've forgotten his name. Senator Joe. Oh, what was his name? That's
Oh
bad.
man, we did this last time. I can't
Yeah,
recall either. John Lewis.
yeah, John Lewis. So this is again, it's an autobiographical comic the about him trying to raise his daughter during the time of President Trump's uh, reign of terror. Um, and and so it's just kind of like him discussing. It's kind of like a series of comic essays about what does he tell his daughter about kind of the nature of democracy, the importance of protests, and um, that hope is something that you need to struggle and strive for. It's not something that if you want to um, if you want reality to uh, if you want the world that you want to exist, you need to struggle really hard to achieve that, because there are nefarious forces out there that are going to try and stop you. Again, a lot of it is, I think, yeah, a lot of it's a little bit preachy. If you're not kind of his way politically inclined, I don't think it's necessarily going to convince you of his political argument. But the stuff about raising his child, I think, is really fascinating, and he makes some really creative choices about the way he depicts his daughter. So his daughter is depicted as like a unicorn creature in the a humanoid unicorn creature in the comic, so you don't actually see her depicted as like a human being, where all the other characters are kind of like realistically um, portrayed. So I really enjoyed that, but it might be one for kind of bleeding heart um,
Mhm.
liberals. So let me see what have I got left here on my list. It's Monsters, Kingmaker. Driving Short Distances. This is by Geoff Winterhart, and this is like maybe the most British comic on my list. It's about Sam, who is this kind of deadbeat guy in his kind of mid to late 20s, and he's kind of forced to get a uh, job with uh, this strange character called Keith, and it's just basically them two driving around town, having uh, kind of having strange conversations, and Sam realizing that this is not. Yeah, it's kind of one of those coming of age slacker books that uh, is just so quintessentially British. There's kind of a lot of British humor in there, and there's this kind of generational divide, and I feel like Keith is maybe one of the funniest uh, um, uh, uh, comic creations that I've seen in a long time, and I mean comic in terms of actually being funny, not in terms of like a comic book, but in terms of like a comedic character. He's dislikable, um, weird, but also he's kind of strange, like a little bit like David Brent, kind of this really annoying person that's got some redeeming qualities that kind of get your sympathy with him as well. So it's one that I think people should check out. And then my last pick is a book that we've kind of talked about a lot on the podcast already. It's In by Will McPhail. That's kind of my book of the year. It's we've talked about it a lot. It's a book that helped me with when my mum passed away last year. It really kind of helped me process that. Go through that the grieving process a lot. He's got beautiful artwork. It's witty. It's funny. And if it doesn't kind of win a lot of awards this year, there's absolutely no flipping justice. So yeah,
Right.
and Will is it Will appeared on our podcast as well. And he's a lovely human being too. So yeah, so
He's
that's my
great.
book of
Yeah.
my year.
That's actually the same for me. I knew it would be on your list,
Yeah,
and that is easily the best book I read this year. I own 2 copies, and I'm just going to give them out to people. And yeah,
yeah,
it deserves more recognition than it's gotten, and it's been well reviewed and everything. But yeah, it deserves a mountain of awards.
yeah. I mean, it was mentioned in the Guardian's graphic novel book list of the year, and I think what we probably need to do is actually check out other people's books of the year and kind of see if there's anything on there that kind of interests us. But yeah, I mean, In is something that we've raved about already. If you've not read it, if you've not bought a copy of it, please do so. It's a magnificent achievement in this kind of like this medium that we all love.
Yes, definitely agree.
Okay, cool. So that's kind of my list wrapped up, really. Is there
Yeah, I
anything
mean, it was
else?
a pretty good year for comics for me, at least.
Yeah, and it's a really wide ranging list of stuff there as well. I think we both had horror on our list, fantasy, and it's. I think it just goes to show kind of like the types of stories that are getting published are getting more diverse, and we're getting more
Oh yeah,
types of story being told, which I think is just fantastic.
yeah. I think it's starting to get to the point where you could pretty much tell any kind of story in comics and find an audience, which I'm really, really happy about.
I mean, I think that's always sort of been the case, but I think it's the availability to buy those
Yes.
stories now. I think is kind of like the
Yeah.
massive difference.
Yeah, I
You'd
should
be
say the
able,
creators can live on it. Before they could
yeah,
make it,
yeah,
but they might not have been able
yeah,
to yeah, make a living on it.
yeah. So that's it, guys. We're going to be back soon with another episode. We haven't kind of quite decided yet what book we're going to be uh, reviewing. If you've got any ideas for things that you'd like us to read, if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, please send us an email. We've got kind of a backlist of creators that we need to actually get on the podcast at some point, and I'll start trying to organise that in the coming months as well. Please support the podcast by following us on social media or donating in the tip jar, or so that please just write reviews and leave ratings for us on whichever podcast app you're listening to us on as well.
Much appreciated, guys. Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, okay, and
Good to
Happy
talk
New
to you
Year,
again.
everyone. Happy New Year. Thanks, guys. Bye.